Good day, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Patient-Partnered Involvement in Clinical Cancer Research. Today, I'm the moderator. I'm Paola Atzei, Senior Scientific Program Manager at Rising Tide Foundation for Clinical Cancer Research. And this webinar has been created with two other partnering organizations, the University of Birmingham and Accelerate. And I like to explain to you how Rising Tide Foundation for Clinical Cancer Research is conducting this series of webinars. This is to foster a collaboration between patient advocates and researchers. And this series of webinars is designed to really educate both patient and researchers on how to co-create different aspects of a clinical trial, provide a real example of engagement and strategies that have worked well for successful patient research partnership, and also to discuss metrics of success for patient research partnerships. And the objectives of this webinar are really to promote patient involvement in pediatric clinical research and to share the real-world experience and example of patient-clinician partnership and co-creation in a pediatric clinical trial. And we also like to highlight a success story of this collaboration, and specifically today of the patient partner being part of the Glo-BNHL trial team. And with that, I'm very happy to welcome the panelist of today's webinar, Ms. Nicole Scobie. Please, do you like to say a few words about yourself and introduce yourself, Nicole?
Hi, Paola. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm a parent of a childhood cancer survivor and a patient advocate and the chair of Accelerate, which is a multi-stakeholder platform, including parents and patients and academics and researchers and industry and regulators.
Thank you, Nicole, for being able to participate today. And I'd like to welcome Professor Burke. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you, Paola. My name is Amos Burke, and I am a childhood cancer doctor. And I've been working in the area of clinical trials for many years, in particularly in the field of sort of cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I am the chief investigator for this Glo-BNHL trial that we're going to talk about today.
Very good. And do you like Amos to introduce the trial today?
Thank you, Paola. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a cancer of the lymph nodes and the lymphatic and blood cancer system in children, and frontline treatment is very successful. But unfortunately, if the first line treatment doesn't work, the second line and subsequent treatments that we have are really very poor. And so there's an urgent need for these children to have better treatments. And that is the reason for Glo-BNHL. In this trial, we have multiple treatments that can be investigated at the same time in three different arms, as you can see on the slide. In the first arm, we're trying to look at drugs that are targeted at the immune system. And basically, in treatment arm 1, we've got a drug that's got two arms. One arm grabs the cancer cell and the other arm grabs one of the immune cells and brings them close together. And we hope that something bad happens for the cancer cells. In the second arm, we have, again, something that targets the cancer cells. That's the antibody bit. And as it grabs onto the cancer cell, it's got attached to it a payload of a very toxic drug that's delivered to the cancer cell. And we hope that that will be effective in killing the cells. And then in the third arm, we're trying now to use engineered immune cells that have been trained. They've been modified to recognize cancer cells and home in on them and kill them. In this trial, we tried to make sure that every child who has had B-cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, that's the sort of lymphoma that we're treating, where the treatment has failed or has not been good enough, they can enter the trial. And then, depending on which arm suits them best, they can move to one arm or the other. We don't randomize children, and by that I mean that there's no control treatment. So children don't get standard of care treatment in any of the arms. They all get access to the new treatment. There are very few children available to take part in this study. And so it was really crucial for us to make sure that we could rapidly tell which drugs are working and move them forward, and also rapidly tell which drugs are not working and remove them from the platform. And that's what this design allows us to do. That's a summary of our Glo-BNHL setup.
Thank you so much, Amos. Maybe I ask Nicole, then we go into the real part of the trial now. How, what's your connection with the pediatric cancer research and advocacy, and also specifically to this project? How this was created, developed?
Thanks, Paola. So that's, one of my favorite topics, actually, this particular trial, because I've been involved in it since before it was even a trial, before when it was first an idea. So I've been involved as a parent and patient advocate in a lot of different groups on a lot of different levels, and I got involved on a more international level because I realized that to make a real difference, we need to collaborate together, on an international level, because the patient population is so small. And that's how I got involved in this organization, Accelerate. And Accelerate looks at whatever the issues are in developing new drugs for kids with cancer. Accelerate tries to get everyone together around the table and talk about the issues and analyze them and look for solutions and then make a plan together. And one of the things that Accelerate does and has done for many years are these meetings called Pediatric Strategy Forums, where they bring everyone together around a specific topic. And back in 2017, there was a Pediatric Strategy Forum on exactly this topic, relapsed B-NHL. And as Amos said, these are cancers that have a high cure rate, but with a lot of toxicities. And then for the children who don't, where the initial treatment doesn't work, which is that small percentage, there's just nothing that works. So how do you, cure those kids? And also, how do you reduce the toxicities for those kids that can be cured if there's no way to cure the ones that relapse? You can never reduce those doses, right? So you needed a plan, and they got everyone around the table. And I was one of the patient advocates at that meeting. Of course, very new to all of this and trying to understand how it all worked, but very interested. And they were talking at that meeting about all these different drugs that they needed, that different pharmaceutical companies had that could potentially be developed. But how do you decide which ones to develop when there's so few patients and you need to bring them all together so that as many patients as possible get access, but also so that the research moves forward as fast as possible. And so from that meeting, they came up with this idea, we should have a platform trial. And I was included right from the beginning in kind of creating this. At first, it was just kind of meetings, I think, with brainstorming around the table of how is this going to look? How is it going to work? How are we going to do this? It has to be international. This has never been done. And so from there, we had several meetings and just continued with a lot of work from a lot of people to get to where we are now with an actual running trial that's recruiting patients that can be part of it. And it's opening across the world. I'm here in Switzerland. It's going to open here in Switzerland. And honestly, I'm just really proud to be part of this right from the beginning and to have kind of an equal voice at the table on subjects that, to me, I'm not at all an academic. My background is not at all scientific, but I've been able to contribute as much as possible.
This is amazing. And Amos, can you share an example where advocates' input really improved significantly the trial design or implementation? And how do you consider like a success involving patient partnering in the clinical trial design? Because in this case, the patient partner were involved really from the beginning.
We could start from the very beginning. Nicole said we were both at that first meeting in November 2017. These dates are etched in our minds. And it was clear that the community's wish was that we do something, but it wasn't clear exactly what it should look like.
Mm-hmm.
I should say that there had been a previous international trial in relapsed refractory BNHL. It was a negative trial, but it was really useful because it showed us that it was possible to do an international trial. Now, that trial had been a randomized trial, which is the standard way of deciding whether a treatment's better than what we have already. But it was very clear, and this voice was clear from our patient advocates in the room, that randomization was not a route that the families wanted to go. Because who wants to be randomized to receive standard of care if there's a new drug that could be better? And we know that standard of care isn't good enough. So this was the first challenge. And very early on, we moved away from the idea of a randomized trial and looked at different designs where every patient would get a novel agent, a new drug. Now, that's fundamentally important. In fact, so fundamentally important that that patient advocacy voice has continued through every step of development after we had fleshed out what we thought a trial might look like in skeleton form without any, at that time, without any industry partners. We just had the idea, well, this is how patients might flow. This is what we would give them if they were eligible for it. We took that design with the statistics behind it, which supported a non-randomized trial that could still produce the sort of evidence that an industry partner, that's a pharmaceutical company with a drug that might be of interest, they could take the data from this trial and then take that data to a regulator. And if it's positive, it might contribute to that drug getting a license, which is ultimately what we want, because if a drug is licensed, that means it's available and children can get it. So that's the goal of the trial. Now, this clear patient advocate mandate about no randomization was crucially important when we had those first meetings during a formal process with the regulator. And Nicole was present, and actually that voice, that patient advocacy voice, prevailed. And actually, the regulator agreed with us that very unusually, their insistence on a randomized trial was not appropriate. And that's really the beginnings of what I might call the firsts for this trial, which have been many and are many. And at each stage, it's not just a clinical voice. I don't even want to say it's a joined voice. It's a single voice, but it contains clinical voices, the patient advocate voice, our non-clinical trials team's voices, as well as other scientists and others involved in the trial. If we took the patient advocacy voice out of Glo, it would not be Glo. And I don't think we would be where we are today. There's nothing more powerful than the patient advocate voice on crucial issues, which might be controversial, where there needs to be clarity. I can give other examples. We had the same thing with ethics committee, where the patient advocate voice was able to cut through some observations, stroke objections from the ethics committee and brought the real clarity to the situation such that the ethics committee was willing to accept our proposal. So the value of patient advocacy, I can't explain I can't explain more clearly just how important it is, in my view, for the patient advocacy input in trials like this. That has been recognized not just in Glo, but Nicole will be able to say as well that other academic bodies have been interested in what we have been doing, and the combination of clinician, patient advocate, regulator, industry is really potent, and others are asking us about this formula and what it is about it that is of value. And I know Nicole will want to say a little bit more about that, but maybe you could just from your perspective, say a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, it's really interesting because it also speaks to what it is to be a patient advocate. And back then when we started, like I said, I was kind of starting out and trying to figure all this out. So understanding randomization, what is randomization? So half the kids get the new drug, half don't. Obviously, as a parent, you're sitting there and you're like, well, no, we want all the kids to get the new drug, especially in this case where, you know, the ones who don't get it, we all know they're not going to survive because that's been proven over and over that the standard of care, which is, you know, not good enough. And so all parents want the new drug. That was so obvious. But then we also understood there's another thing that patient advocates want. It's that all children in the future get access to the new drug if it does prove to be good. And for that to happen, it has to get a marketing authorization. So the regulators need to say, yes, you guys did all the right things in your trial so that, you know, the science is robust and it's valid and the research is good. And now we're going to give you a marketing authorization. Then all kids in the future get it. And normally regulators want trials to be randomized because that's the gold standard. That way you can for sure know all these people got the new drug, all these people did not. This one, they survived or they survived longer. This one, they did not. So this one was better. But we couldn't accept that as patient advocates. And that was really heard. And because like what Amos said about all of us having one voice and they were able to explain it to us and we were able to explain our point of view and we were able to come up, well, they were able to come up with this design that was really innovative, I think. We were all together able to explain that to the regulators and then later to the ethics committee. And I think that made a really big difference.
This is very impressive. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think it could help a lot. And Nicole, just also to help some patient advocate, can you share some practical ways the patient advocates can really contribute to protocol review, consent forms, recruitment strategies, or dissemination even of the trial result? Because okay, now we're not there. We're saying that, you know, from the beginning you're involved, but it's also very important the role of the patient until the end of the project and the end of the trial. Can you share maybe some practical ways?
Yeah, I mean, Paola, the patient advocates can be involved in a lot of different ways, right? So it all depends on what our interests are, how much time we have, you know, where we can get involved. Like you said, we can be involved right from the very beginning at the trying to push for the research questions that are important to us, all the way to like the trial, the design of the trial and helping to choose how the trial is conducted and having input in that, reviewing the patient-facing informations, you know, those long sheets of paper that you read in a moment of crisis and you sign without really understanding them, making sure those are actually understandable while also covering all the stuff that legally has to be covered. Right to the end when the trial is done and the results are known and that has to be communicated and written and disseminated, the patient advocate can be in that too. So I guess I would say in every single part, and then depending on where they would like to be more involved.
True.
And if I could add just there, Nicole, because
Sure.
recently you shared a statistic about your involvement in Glo-BNHL, which I think would be really useful for others to hear. But before you share that statistic, I'd just like to endorse the fact that our patient advocacy team has been involved in every single part of Glo-BNHL, every committee, and we have multiple. We have trial steering committees and we have trial management groups. Our patient advocates are involved in every part. They've been involved in the discussions about deciding which new potentially good drugs should come into the platform. We have a process for evaluating those before they come into the platform, and our patient advocates have been part of that process. They've been part of the process of working with the potential industry partner whilst they develop their ideas about how they want to develop the drug. They do that in a regulatory framework. So they have to develop what are called either pediatric investigation plans in Europe or initial pediatric study plans for the United States. And our patient advocates have been involved in our involvement with those companies in developing those so that their plans that they submit to the regulator are in harmony with what we have proposed in Glo-BNHL. And then after we have done the negotiations and it's agreed that we're going to work together, our patient advocates have been involved from the start in the development then of each of the arms. So getting down to the nitty-gritty, how is the new drug going to be used? Is it going to be used alone, or is it going to be used in combination with chemotherapy, standard chemotherapy? What is that going to look like for the patient? What other things might be of interest? Sometimes we need to measure the levels of drugs that children might be exposed to when we give them the new agent. What does that look like for the child? How much blood taking will there be? How frequently will the blood taking be? What will the visit schedule look like? All of these things our patient advocates are involved in. And then once you've produced your document, your protocol, now you have to get someone to approve it. And that's the regulatory authorities and the ethical bodies. And our advocates are involved in that as well, not just in the preparation for submission, but we have taken our advocacy team to the meetings, particularly with ethics. And I think that was a little unusual for the ethics committee when our patient advocates came with us, but we made it clear that this is the team. and again, their input was vital. Through to the groups that we have, the trial management groups who will oversee the running of the trial. We have our patient advocates there. We also have a separate biology part, because one of the things that was very clear back in 2017 is that we need to know more about why these lymphomas either respond or don't respond. And it's our duty with every single child who participates to learn as much as we can, as fast as we can. So there's an entire biology team, and there is a patient advocate involved in that as well. There's no part of Glo-BNHL that is not for patient advocates. And I think what we have learned and demonstrated is that going forward, I think clinical trials will be better. They will be more relevant, and also they will push more boundaries if we involve and include and value our patient advocates.
Very good. And maybe for Nicole, how do you ensure that the advocate input is really integrated, meaningfully integrated in the trial and not just symbolic?
Paola, I don't want to jump in there, but in your answer, Nicole, could you just add the non-symbolic data that you were going to share?
I know what you're referring to because
Yes.
Paola, we were in a meeting once and I can't remember why, but I had looked at my calendar to see how many Glo-BNHL meetings I had been in. And my calendar doesn't go back all the way to 2017. It went, I can't remember how many years back it went. I think a couple at least years,
Just
but
a
it was
couple,
over 110 meetings that I'd had for Glo-BNHL. So it was a lot. It impressed, I guess it impressed people since you remember it, Amos. Okay, to answer your question, I wanted to point out one thing. The first thing is that I'm not the only patient advocate in Glo-BNHL. I was the first one, and because I was at that meeting and I was involved in those early discussions. But of course, it's a complicated trial. It's an international trial. So now I think there are 5 of us involved in the different arms. And one thing that's really important as well is that the Glo-BNHL team has a person we can reach out to specifically to ask questions or talk. And they've started, I think for quite a while now, we've started having every 2 or 3 months meetings of just the patient advocates. So it's called a PPI meeting and it's just us. And we have our Glo-BNHL resource person who launches it. She's there at the beginning and then she's there at the end. But for the whole meeting part in the middle, it's just us, which is great because then we can ask each other questions like, well, this is what I heard. Did you hear that? I didn't understand this. And, so I'm not sure if that answered your question.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you so much. But I mean, now we described all seems the positive things about this relationship among patient advocates and clinician. But like in all relationship, there are also challenges, right? And so, can you share some of the common challenges in involving advocates in pediatric trials? It's not always that easy as your story.
Well,
And
can I get that one to start? So of course it's not easy because we don't have the scientific background. So that's the first hurdle, is getting us up to this level of understanding. So when Amos talks about how I, was with them in front of the ethics committee and in front of the regulators, I can't go and sit in front of an ethics committee and talk about a complex clinical trial if I haven't been prepared ahead of time, because of course I can sit there, but I won't understand what I'm saying, and I need to be able to understand so that I can make the point. So for that, you need a team, and which we have in Glo-BNHL, of people who are available to explain things and to talk to you. What's complicated is we're going to ask a lot of questions, and we're going to take a lot of time, and we could ask the wrong questions. And I do remember one specific meeting that we were having as in one of the trial arms with a pharmaceutical company partner, where I was thinking of a question and I didn't dare ask it. And later on, after the meeting, I asked Amos, I was worried about asking this because I was worried about kind of ruffling some feathers, like saying something that maybe people wouldn't quite like, having a pointed question. And he said, no, make sure you ask, because there's nothing that I remember you saying this, Amy, there's nothing that you can say that a patient advocate should be able to say that's going to destroy a clinical trial. If it's that weak that a patient advocate can't ask the naive questions, then there's something wrong in the trial. And that was really valuable. Yeah.
I see. And what are the misconceptions about the role of advocates in clinical research, and specifically maybe into pediatric clinical research?
Maybe if I lead out on that one, because many of the misconceptions are
Sure.
heavily on the clinical side. um, um, there's a misconception that patient advocates will not understand. It's too complicated for them. It's way above them. And really, all we need them to do is just to look at the patient information sheets, maybe cast an eye over the protocol, and at its lowest level, just to tick a box, perhaps on a funding application to say that we've had some patient advocate involvement. I would like to challenge all of those. And I think what we've done in Glo-BNHL really illustrates that way of thinking about patient advocacy involvement is not only wrong, but it limits your possibilities in trial design. It limits the scope of what you might want to undertake. And ultimately, then it frustrates the efforts to get better therapies for children. And the same would apply in the adult world as well. The more we can work together, the better we will make trials, because we will have a fuller understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve.
And I would say the misconceptions on the side of the patient advocates is that they think they won't understand. They think they need to understand everything. So we think it's going to be too complicated, and we're not at that level. And we think it's not our place. And it is. We don't need to be at that level anyway, because that's not our role.
I see. And just as a last question to both of you, what changes you like to see in how pediatric trials are designed and how the advocates are involved?
Well, if I start with that one, I would like to see what we have developed in Glo-BNHL become normal for clinical trials in childhood cancer. Of course, we are probably at the cutting edge of patient advocacy involvement, as we are at the cutting edge with the trial design, and many other things about Glo-BNHL. But that doesn't mean that we can't disseminate the different elements of great practice that we have experienced, and hopefully those can begin to be implemented in trials as they come along. We realize there's a very wide difference across countries in patient advocacy involvement. In some places, patient advocacy is welcomed and embraced. In others, just the culture of clinical trials means that patient advocacy is sort of relegated to the tick box level. We've got to try and bring everybody up, and we realize that you can't go from 0 to 100 in one step. But if we can break down those steps and give opportunities for people to see that there are many places where patient advocates can be involved, then perhaps we can shift that dial and have much richer, better trial designs going forward. Nicole?
Yeah, completely agree. Everything you just said. I mean, I don't think I can add anything to it. Just maybe the importance of working together as equal partners, which is the example of Glo-BNHL. And I think also Rising Tide is showing that too in wanting patient advocates to always be part of your grant applications, right? And I think that's important. It's setting the example. It's something also that Accelerate is demonstrating by having all of the partners as equals at the table.
Thank you so much, really, both of you, for sharing this great example, how a patient advocate and clinician work together and are continuing to work together. We wish all the success for this trial, and we're really looking forward to see the results of the trial. And thank you all for your attention today.
Thanks, Paola.
Thank you.